Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Forward Thinking Podcast. It's Crissy here from CS2. So today we have two guests, Charlie and Xander. If you listen to the podcast, you'll recognize both of them. But I do want to lead with we have a special announcement. And everyone just loves Xander on last week's podcast so much. We just decided to give him more free reign with coming onto the podcast. No, I'm just kidding. But really, Xander's going to be co-hosting right now with myself over the next few episodes, with plans to take over as host as I go on maternity leave. So surprise to everyone listening. I'm expecting my second child in February. So, it leaves less room for recording weekly podcasts. And so Xander's going to be taking over. So, welcome back to the podcast, Xander. And I'm happy to hand over the baton to you. I think you're going to fill my shoes amazingly.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited to be able to be a regular on the podcast and eventually lead the way. So thanks so much for thinking of me.
For those of you who don't know, Xander has a background in theater, so I feel like just any spotlight for him is just fulfilling his dreams. So, I thought what better person on the CC team to take over.
Finally getting some use out of that undergrad.
Yeah. All right. So today I'll be kind of leading through the topic, and we're going to be talking about security risks for your marketing automation platform and kind of our guide to the common ones you see, how to handle it, and also what implications it can have on your customer experience and also your reputation if you don't handle it. So, not the sexiest topic, but something very important and that all operators should know about. So just to kick it off, Charlie, did you want to talk through kind of, the first risk that we see commonly, and this one is a lot, I think, mainly almost every like Marketo, HubSpot part, it doesn't matter what marketing automation platform vendor you have, these are, risks that might happen. So what's the first one, Charlie?
Yeah, so the first one I'm going to talk about is getting your forms attacked. So I think anyone that's been in MOPS for any period of time has woken up in the morning with thousands of spam leads in the database causing chaos. And it is a big problem that is very consistent, and it's one of the more difficult ones to solve. But kind of going through the actual problem. So, in terms of actually how this is happening, so a lot of people with your forms embedded on your website, you have with especially like tools like Marketo with the form API, it is relatively easy actually to insert data through the form API into your database. Mm-hmm. There are some kind of protocols and ways that you can block, like especially through like just more manual form submissions, if people are coming in and actually like inputting data within the form manually. But through the form API, it is a little bit more difficult. So it does lead to a lot of issues where one, getting a lot of spam leads in your system is just a nuisance. And obviously that can be kind of frustrating. It can cause a lot of sync issues. It can cause issues where a lot of automation is triggered from all of that data entering your system. That can lead into further issues. So we've seen examples where a client's whole Salesforce instance pretty much got like locked down and overloaded because I forget, Crissy, how many it was now. It was 10. It might have even been 100,000.
Yeah, 100,000
spam records.
Yeah,
were entered into Marketo.
It's the most we've ever seen, and I think it's also they felt the impact because what tends to happen with these too is they'll try like a batch. If they think it's working, they'll keep adding more and then adding more. And so that's what happened with the client. It was just like continuous over like the night and like 24 hours that ended up being like 100,000 records.
Yeah. I think it might have been over a weekend as well where people weren't really monitoring it. And it triggered all sorts of automation in Salesforce, and that's ultimately kind of like what led to the issues there. But it's very difficult to handle, right? Like Marketo will tell you that maybe you should put some kind of honeypot field on the
Mm.
form, and if you see that that's filled out, then you can use that field if it equals true to kind of exclude them from automation. Difficulty is, anyone that's trying to attack the form can quite easily just like not check that. There's other issues with trying to look at the patterns of the data coming through. So we were just talking about this before the podcast. A lot of them, I think, especially like a few years ago, we were seeing the kind of the Chinese Gmail QQ.com email addresses coming through. So people would be like, oh, I should just, delete any QQ email address that comes in. Obviously that's not great if you're targeting China because they are legitimate email addresses. But also, that's not the only email address that's going to be coming through, right? We've seen all sorts of patterns before, and you can't, really, you want to be able to sleep okay at night. And just knowing that, okay, well, I've got an email address contains filter on a few smart campaigns in Marketo that might be syncing to Salesforce or kind of like more of the kind of resource heavy automation. And all I have is just email address contains QQ. That's not really a security protocol that's going to really help you if the spammer comes with anything else, right?
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to handle. One option, the
I
most
first have
robust...
a question actually for
Okay.
Xander. When you before you started at CS2, had you had any experience with that type of attack, like at your organization? Had you seen that before?
Yeah,
Okay.
we had one of those situations where it was like over the weekend. It was
Yeah.
a couple thousand, but we were a security company, so nobody wants to have that sort of riding on them. So it was something that was taken very seriously, even though the overall impact was not hundreds of thousands of records, but it's still a vulnerability.
Totally.
Yeah.
It always ends up being like your most public forms too, which will be like your contact sales and your demo request, which then sends out alerts to the
Alerts.
sales team.
Right.
And so, there's a lot high visibility on it, which is tough because it is so common and it does happen. And so that's why it's good to be ready for when it does, or at least know about what could be happening, like what Charlie's talking about.
Yeah, definitely the sales alerting people. I'll get on to kind of like some of the risky triggers you might have in a second, but the other option that Marketo specifically has kind of always told people to do is just like delete the form and then create a new one and then embed the new form because that form ID no longer exists. The problem with that is that they can just come back. Like I had a few clients for a while that they didn't want to really take this seriously, and I was going to get to kind of one of the more robust methods, which is reCAPTCHA. But they for ages didn't really want to go down reCAPTCHA the route, so they were just like delete the form, wait a few more weeks, get attacked again, delete that form, wait a few weeks, get attacked again. And it just kind of built up. And they're actually the example that I'm going to tell in a minute where it got really, really out of control with some of the triggers. But reCAPTCHA probably is one of the more robust methods. Now there are a couple of forms of reCAPTCHA. There's how many boats are in this picture kind of. They'll click the boats in all of these tiles kind of thing. But then there's more of the invisible kind of. I think it's V3 reCAPTCHA.
Yeah.
Where it is giving you some kind of confidence score in whether it is a legitimate person or not. The difficulty with that is that the data still ends up in your marketing automation platform. You just have a score to say this is, either likely spam or not. So then you have to go through all of your automation and everything to be able to sort of like quote unquote quarantine them. I wish these automation platforms had like if this thing equals this, like quarantine from everything kind of functionality. That would be amazing, but they don't. So
yeah, who's listening from the product team?
Yeah,
let's get that going.
So yeah, but then the more a lot of our clients, when we've built out their marketing automation platforms, they have a very well kind of thought through master order of operations process, which is makes the things a lot easier, because you can kind of, the beginning of that process, you can say, okay, what is the confidence this is spam or not, and then either run them through or not, and then it kind of like restricts them from the rest of the process. Whereas a lot of people's instances of their marketing automation platform, record gets created, everything fires off at the from lead created or form filled out. So you have to go through, and this is why that other client didn't want to do recapture, because we probably would have had to go through a few hundred smart campaigns and add that check, because they hadn't set up proper order operations. So yeah,
I think a lot of folks are also difficult. Just like worried about the impact on their customer experience with putting in reCAPTCHA. Like it's kind of just like an annoying kind of.
Well, the invisible reCAPTCHA is they don't need to see it, right?
But I think when you first pitch it to them, everyone's like,
that's where they
kind
think.
of assumption is like, oh, am I going to have to select like the 3 like traffic lights and it's like testing my intellect every time I do it. I'm afraid to do it wrong. So, but I think that this method is probably like the best method for confidence wise. Like you're talking about like ways to quarantine, because there's some major impacts to all those triggers that you're talking about that could go down, down funnel. And especially if you have a master order of ops, it's really nice to have, because then you can like figure out a path for them like right at the start, and then they don't sync to Salesforce and so forth. So
Charlie, I'll go ahead. We're going to get into the trigger issues.
Yeah, I just want to know about you're alluding to some of the issues with having a trigger, and I know there's one big issue we've seen in the past with the client with this. So that probably had like the most impact on like their reputation. Yeah. So it
was brutal. But before I get to that one, you raised a good one with the sales alerts, because I think that is kind of the reputational damage, but more internally within your team. So like if sales wakes up in the morning and they've got 3,000, demo request alerts from this spam data, that's really not good. So like that, I've seen that happen a lot. And sales and marketing alignment is always something that could be worked on and improved. And you don't need that kind of like reputational damage with your sales team that like, oh, marketing can't even, like they're already complaining probably about your leads, and now they got 3,000 spam leads. This makes it even worse. And then if you think about all of the other kind of follow-on effects with kind of your data and reporting, right? If you had 3,000 demo requests, yes, you can delete those leads. That might delete that data, but what else happened, right? Did it create visible touch points? Do you have a data warehouse that had some kind of like engagement tracking in there? Then now you've got to go delete the data from there. Is all of your reporting just completely skewed by this, and it's going to take you a while to clean it up? So there's a lot of that kind of just the team just losing trust kind of in the marketing organization if you just allow this to happen consistently. But then the reputational damage externally. So this is something, one thing that if anyone listens to this podcast, the first thing you should do is go through every single trigger that you have within your marketing automation platform or outreach or any sending platform that's sending an email to prospects and customers that is triggered by a form fill, and check to see if you're using tokens in that email and what tokens you're using, and the reason why, and think about removing them, because I like personalization. I'm not against personalization. I think it's like in an autoresponder, it's a nice to have, but the risk with it is that what one of our clients saw a few years back is that a lot of these spam records came in with real email addresses, like kind of charliesaunders@gmail.com kind of email addresses. That had probably been scraped and kind of bought on the dark market or whatever. But they all came in with legitimate email addresses, or at least they looked like it. But then within the first name field, there was, you said this wasn't, at the beginning, you said this wasn't a sexy topic, but like at the beginning of that email, it said, for sexy pictures, click this link.
Yeah.
And so then I kind of smile now, but honestly, it was mortifyingly horrible at the time, because what happened was about a few thousand or tens of thousands, I forget the exact number, of legitimate people got sent an email that said, "Hi, for sexy pics, click this link." And that is obviously bad for so many reasons. One, obviously that's a horrible email for them to receive from you. But two, that link is potentially going to install malicious software or some kind of malware on their computer. And now you not only have reputational damage, but you have kind of a security issue on your hands. So that is why now with all of our clients, we recommend in autoresponders, anything that's just like, oh, you downloaded this piece of content, here it is. Like, just remove the tokens. It's just not worth the risk.
Yeah.
That's a good call.
I'm honestly just not really a fan of autoresponders in general.
I mean, it depends, right? If you do a demo request, it's kind of nice.
Yeah, I could see that. But then also just depending on your process, like it could be, handled a certain way, or that comes from like you instant book and things like that. But I agree, like you can't get rid of them altogether, but it could be also a reason to just maybe minimize how many autoresponders you have, because you're also talking about triggering off form fill. Also, right. I think everyone also needs to think about triggering off like persons created, or what happens in triggers and outreach if someone's marked as a demo request lead. Are they getting auto sequenced or something like that? So really think through like all of the like new person create, or for those specific sources that you have forms tied to. But scary stuff. All right.
So main actions and takeaways from that, kind of think about reCAPTCHA. It's probably a good thing to explore if you've been experiencing this, or maybe even not, and then go and look to see all of your autoresponders and check to see if someone was to insert malicious text into a field within a form submission, are you going to start sending that to unaware people?
Yeah.
One thing that I want to add in as well is that we have a lot of clients that are moving over to a PLG motion, and sometimes those forms are not your automation platform forms. So though the product team may not be thinking about this, so this is a value add that you can offer to your organization of if you do have a demo free trial, something that's creating users in the product. You know, if you have 1,000 spam bots that come into the product, that can also have detrimental impacts to your overall service. So it's a good opportunity to, introduce some of those recommendations of reCAPTCHA or something like that, even if it's not your form that you own.
Totally.
Yeah, good point.
All right, Xander. So recently we saw a new type of threat, like very recently, and we all got kind of up to speed on it and looked at our clients for it. And it's somewhat related to forms, but a bit different. So can you take us through what recent security threat we saw, and just describe what happens and why it can be a huge issue for companies who might have this attack?
Yeah, absolutely. So what the vulnerability is it can be on form fills, it can be via list uploads. It's really anything in your database, and that is inserting formulas that you would use in like Google Sheets or other cloud-based applications that call out to other services. So for example, in Google Sheets, they have a formula that starts with equals import and then something else. So import XML, and a malicious attacker can create this, include a concatenated web URL that goes to a malicious website. That's going to ultimately extract data from that spreadsheet or insert spyware onto your laptop or onto a machine that somebody is using. And so when you think about like how many times do people download records out of the database to run data analysis, maybe they're pulling it out of a Snowflake or a data warehouse. If you have these malicious formulas sitting in any of your fields in your database, it could be a really big risk. So it was something that was escalated through a white hat hacker, who is somebody who is doing this on behalf of organizations to identify gaps in their security practices. And then I think that over time it's become a lot more apparent, and the awareness has been proliferated throughout the marketing ops community, but it's something that we definitely have been working with our clients on, of identifying. It's tricky because, as Charlie had mentioned with the form API, as long as they know your Munchkin code, which is going to be available by inspecting your website, or any of your other services identifiers, and then they start utilizing common fields that are accessible in everybody's Salesforce instance, or they might start using fields that are very common for third-party applications. If they notice that you're running, some sort of enrichment platform, they might know then that these are the default fields for that enrichment platform, and I can now start to insert these in fields that you may not even be expecting.
Yeah. What I know, we did a check for pretty much all of our clients once we found out about it. But can you, for those who want to kind of see if they already have this vulnerability just in their database, what would you suggest they do?
Yeah, I mean, there are certain characters in formulas that you would have in a spreadsheet that you're not going to expect in your database, right? Equals concatenate, equals import, maybe just the equal symbol. I don't know of anybody that's first name is equals anything. So, you can kind of start to do wildcard searches through your
Isn't Elon Musk kid got some special characters in the name or something?
Probably.
I feel like it's just called equals.
I feel like if there's any chance of that happening, it's probably there. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, it's probably not too common. As you start to look through your database, doing wildcards, what we were searching for is import XML equals import, kind of captures all of those variations, because there's different formulas that you can use. And they're formulas that are good on the Google Sheets side. So it's not like that's the security vulnerability. It's the fact that it can be used maliciously, like a lot of security attacks, right? It's taking something that works for a specific purpose and then they use it for ill intent. But concat, if it's in there, basically anything that you might start to think about from a formula perspective. And what we were doing is, I mean, it's kind of hard. If your database is like a lot of ours, it's hundreds of fields that are sitting on every single record. So are you running this search against everything? We were running the search against the most common fields, and the fields that we had explicitly on the forms. And then if you start to identify like that's the low hanging fruit. I feel like most security, attackers are going to do the least amount of work as fast as possible. So they'd probably identify the fields that are showing up in the forms and then moving on to other websites. But that's not to say that you are safe if it doesn't show up in those fields. It's just, that's going to be the most common approach that somebody would take.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's like the like you said, like, I think at least take initial stab at it and start. And it's like low hanging fruit, I think. And then also, I think alerting like your sales ops team or like the people that own the other database will let them know, and they can do their own kind of similar checks as well, just so that everyone's kind of, because there could be purging activities that happened in some systems, but not the other. There might be a better query that like they can, or faster query that they could run. But like you said, like you might be sent like with our spam bots, but you could have multiple systems attached where then you do export that data. And so think through all of that and loop in those teams too. Or you might be the owner of all of them. So check all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then alert your security team as well. Because the security teams have their own communities of people who have probably solved this problem in their own unique way. So now you're attacking it from an operations perspective, but you're also attacking it from a security perspective. And then if there was anything that happened, at the very least, you as the owner of your systems and your database have alerted the internal teams that you need to alert, to make sure that, you're covering your bases as well.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the important takeaways is that, yeah, as the owner of one or many platforms, right, which have data in them, which have these type of vulnerabilities, knowing about them is kind of the first step, but then just feeling that responsibility to make sure that, one, you're trying to protect your systems, but also like you're checking, and maybe you've got a cadence where every month you do some kind of security review. As these systems become ever more interconnected and complicated, you know, something like this happening can just get kind of escalated pretty quickly, right? Like that data gets in Marketo, it syncs to Salesforce, it syncs to Snowflake. It's just now in like 35 different systems, and like to clean that up and now takes 10 times longer than maybe it would have 5 to 10 years ago. So we just need to really think about, and it's kind of that product mentality again, like product teams and teams developing technology, they're thinking about security, right? They've got a big part of that is security. So like we've got to think about that as well. Like how can we make these systems secure and remove or you can never fully remove a vulnerability, but protect our organizations from these vulnerabilities. And as regions of the world become ever more strict in this respect too around data, the penalties are just getting ever more increased, and then also the reputational damage probably is, or maybe even worse than the penalties, right? So it's something that we should all be very conscious of.
Absolutely.
For either of you, maybe Xander, you start, but what do you think is one thing that is I know besides what we've already talked about, but what do you think is some things that you think an organization could maybe think they're doing the right thing, but doesn't really might be the wrong thing to do when trying to address these type of security risks? Or is there something that you think that they're doing right now that could be changed but could minimize their risk? I don't know. Do you have any extra thoughts on that? Start.
Yeah, I'll start. I think that the first thing is that when something comes up, you turn on reCAPTCHA, or you implement a process, right? And then you wipe your hands clean and you say, I'm secure. That's not being secure, right? What's being secure is setting up the process and then setting up the governance, the cadence, the monitoring, the reporting that you need to say, yes, it's set up, it's still working, and it's catching. So don't just set it and forget it. That's not the type of work that this is. And it doesn't have to be a daily task. I mean, if it's really bad, you're going to notice it, but it should be something that you are regularly testing, once a month at the, I would probably say a minimum, you should be prioritizing.
Yeah.
Totally. I totally agree with that. It's an arms race, right? It always has been, and it always will be. It's like, we'll get smarter, they'll get smarter, we'll get smarter. And it's just kind of like, you can't just set it and forget it, like Xander said. And I think the other part of that is don't just set it after you've experienced an issue, right? Like let's be proactive and try and stop issues happening, because you never know. The first issue you have with this could be really bad. Like what we've mostly seen is like, you start to see like some spam leads come through forms because they're kind of testing it out a bit. And then, so it makes people think, oh, I can be reactive. I haven't had a big problem yet. I'll wait for a small problem and then do something. But you never know. Like you could just wake up one Monday morning with a huge mess on your hands. And then I think the reason why people aren't proactive is just resources, right? We're all very strapped. There's so many priorities. And I think, when it comes to kind of getting more resources, trying to position security with your leadership team, where you might want to try and get more budget, either for a headcount or third-party resources to help you with this. Positioning like security as like a threat and a reputational issue, customer experience issue. I mean, they would be kind of crazy not to take it seriously, right?
Yeah.
So I'm sure we're all working in B2B SaaS. I'm sure they're taking the security of their products pretty seriously, right? And now, especially like Xander brought up PLG, our stuff is integrated with the product now. So like we need to make sure our world is secure as well. Otherwise, you can create vulnerabilities within your product. So I think the communication piece with leadership, letting them know that we need to not just be like, oh, Marketo is kind of handling it, like we don't need to do anything. You know, we need to make our platform secure beyond what the technology is doing by itself.
Yeah. I would say too, like there's an like whenever I see problems, I always then think, okay, what are some opportunities here too? And I think it could also like this is an opportunity to look at like your hygiene practices in general. Like if you have a ton of forms on your website, it's probably worth like retiring all of those and getting rid of them. Maybe even think through, like we've talked about it a bunch on this podcast, but like, do you actually need that many forms on your site, or do you just need the ones where you're going to capture people who are ready? And yes, those forms are still vulnerable to attack, but it just makes the overall like maintenance or handling of when something like this happens, minimized. And so that's an opportunity there. And then I just want to echo Xander talking about like the monitoring, because there's a lot of things you can do, like building a dashboard for monitoring and just overall data in general, like bad data coming through, because there's also just legitimate sources of bad data. So if you're just looking at this from like a security risk, but then also just data hygiene, there's honeypot leads that could get created and stuff like that. So also using some type of email verification can be really great too. So just all the ways that you can like monitor, but or put in like just extra precautions and then keep things clean. Like I think that all of your risks get massively reduced. And then you don't have those Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday fire drills happening. So any other final thoughts from the team?
I think we covered everything. I mean,
Okay.
I think take it seriously so you can sleep better at night, right? You don't want to be waking up in the middle of the night worried about these things. So, and you're never going to be perfect, but if you make it slightly more difficult for an attacker to attack, then they're going to move on to the easier target, right? So
that's exactly right.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, Charlie and Xander. Thanks, everyone, for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of Forward Thinking, feel free to share it with a colleague or friend, or leave us a review. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time on Forward Thinking. Have a good one.